Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We are on Tuesday this week because I was on vacation last week. I was traveling yesterday, so we had to bump the show by one day, so thank you for your patience. We are going to talk about Dune. We're going to talk about Shang-Chi. We are pivoting hard into the fall movie season, but there's still some summer movie stuff left to take care of, which we are going to discuss. A lot to get to, but as we sadly have to do sometimes at the top of the show, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of people who passed away in the past week or so. The first is comedian Anthony A.J. Johnson, who kind of exemplified the saying that there are no small parts. He is best known for his role in Friday. That's probably maybe the first thing that I remember my friends quoting about Friday when this movie came out, were his lines from the movie. He was also in several other movies, including House Party and The Players Club, television shows as well. Perhaps not a household name, but somebody who left a big impact on the projects that he was in. Somebody else who left a big impact was comedian Norm Macdonald, who was a pivotal key figure in the shaping of my own sense of humor, really challenging what humor could be. I grew up as a kid watching Saturday Night Live, and I remember when he took over for Weekend Update, at first I didn't really get it. Part of it is that I was young. Part of it is that Norm Macdonald operated on his own wavelength. There was no comedian that was like Norm Macdonald, and he would sometimes go for these almost anti-jokes, or he would set up a runner on one episode of Weekend Update that wouldn't pay off until a year later or 2 years later when he kept on doing the joke over and over. He was also just a funny person. I remember seeing his appearances on David Letterman. He did the roast of Bob Saget, which is one of those comedy routines that I thought was one of the most brilliant things I'd ever seen, that you just don't get at first when you're watching. He's going for intentionally bad jokes, and yet as it goes on, it's one of the most brilliant things ever. Norm Macdonald was fighting apparently a very long and very private battle with cancer that he decided not to do publicly, so his loss was really a blindside for fans of his. But if you're a fan of comedy, especially growing up as I did in the 90s and into the 2000s, Norm Macdonald was one of those voices that will never be replicated. Somebody who left a huge impact on the world of comedy, on the world of Saturday Night Live, you name it. Norm Macdonald and Anthony A.J. Johnson, two comedians that left big marks on their field, both have passed away. Let's move now, and we're going to do things a little bit differently this week. Usually we start with the weekend box office top 5, which we're going to do in just a moment. But the big story that I wanted to focus on is a movie that we have been talking about, I should say we, meaning us in the film community, for quite some time. One of those much delayed movies from 2020, and that is Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which is coming out here in the United States and in many other territories in about a month on October 22nd. But this past weekend started its debut and its rollout in several markets internationally. And it was, if you look at the international box office, and these are the markets that are outside of the domestic box office, so not the United States and Canada, Dune was the number one movie internationally this past weekend. It opened in several territories, including France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. The number one market was Russia. It made $7.6 million in Russia, and it is very early to start wondering how Dune is going to do. This is a pretty good number from these markets. If you're going to compare it, if the closest thing that we can get to a one-to-one comparison is that Blade Runner 2049 in Russia, which, as I mentioned, it was Dune's number one market this past weekend, made $4.8 million in its opening weekend. It finished with just over $10 million. So Dune is tracking consistently, obviously, ahead through this first weekend in Russia. It's also tracking ahead of Blade Runner 2049 in the other markets in which it opened. So that is a key early indicator that we may see a broader appeal to Dune than we did for Blade Runner 2049 back in 2017, one of my favorite movies of the 2010s. I love Blade Runner 2049. The only kind of melancholy thing about it was that it did not find the box office success that many, including myself, had hoped that it would. These are very early returns for Dune, and again, we are in very odd times for the box office. We are not out of this pandemic, far from it. There are several major markets, including Australia and Japan, that are being impacted by surges in cases, as we still are to a degree here domestically. So we are not back to business as usual. But even given those caveats, the early returns do show that it is outpacing Denis Villeneuve's previous film, Blade Runner 2049, and that we may see this replicated in other markets. There is more good news for Dune, which is that it was given an elusive Chinese release date. It is going to launch in China on October 22nd, the same date that it launches here domestically in the United States. No Time to Die also getting a Chinese release date for October 29th, a week after Dune opens. So this is good news, obviously, for both of these films. The Chinese market is still a huge movie-going market. That does mean, however, that hope is diminishing more and more for this slate of summer films that came out that have not gotten Chinese release dates. Shang-Chi and Black Widow. I think the door's probably pretty much closed on Black Widow at this point. Space Jam, A New Legacy, Jungle Cruise. So many films that don't have release dates and don't look like they're going to get release dates in China. And this is something, if you're a studio head, that you have to pay attention to, because the fact that this Chinese blackout, which has always coincided with a part of the summer box office, but then movies like some of the Marvel movies will come out after the blackout period is over. The fact that this blackout lasted almost the entire summer, essentially, and that on the back end, China was not in a hurry to date these releases, is something that you're going to have to take into account when you're budgeting movies and when you're trying to figure out a global strategy for these films, because we are now going to see, apparently, multiple summer quote-unquote blockbuster films that will not get release dates in China, or are going to get them later on down the line this year, and after they're already available, not only because of their day-and-date release, many of them on streaming services, on piracy outlets, but also available on Blu-ray and digital HD, etc., as is the case with a lot of these movies. So this is something to keep in mind. This is the first time, I think, that we're seeing to this degree the number of big summer movies that are not getting a Chinese release date since the market really started expanding about a decade ago. When we look at the road ahead for Dune, it's going to open in several Mideastern countries coming up this weekend. It continues its rollout into October. And then, as I mentioned before, on October 22nd, it hits a lot of major markets, including the United States and Canada, China, the UK, many, many others. So we will continue to track Dune. I know it feels weird to be talking about it already, essentially a month before it opens, but this was the global strategy that it was decided to employ with this film. Is it going to be a winner? I don't know. I'm anxious to see Dune. I don't know when I'm going to be able to. I will definitely be doing what I have to do to see it on a big screen. That may very well mean that I'm going to wait until the day that it opens. But this is one of the most anticipated films for so many people this fall. So let's turn now to the weekend box office, which is where we usually start the show. And for the third week in a row, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings topped the box office with $21.6 million. And as we've been doing with Shang-Chi, I wanted to continue to track how the drop-off is going alongside the other films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And when you look at the numbers, Shang-Chi actually, when the final numbers came in, is tied with Iron Man and Captain America the Winter Soldier for the best hold from the second to third weekend by percentage of any film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, some people would say, well, it has lower grosses because of the pandemic, even though I think that the grosses have been impressive. So it didn't have as far to fall. But when you look at these other movies, Iron Man, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, next up, Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Panther, these are some of the biggest moneymakers in the MCU. So we are seeing a continuation of the storyline that's been going on since Shang-Chi debuted. It had an opening weekend that was higher than anticipated. It had a second weekend hold that was certainly better than many films in the MCU, and now tied for the best hold from weekend 2 to weekend 3. You see here Black Widow, the other movie in orange there, with a 55% drop off toward the back of the pack. Now, that doesn't mean that these are financial disappointments. If you look, the worst drop off from weekend 2 to weekend 3 was Thor Ragnarok, which was a big fan favorite, a big box office success. So this is not saying that these movies weren't successful. I just think it's impressive that Shang-Chi is able to continue to hold as it is doing. The lack of competition probably in the marketplace is some of it, because you have some, if we look at the rest of the top 5. Free Guy dropped less than 10%. This is the other, for me, big story of the summer as we go into the fall, is how well this movie is holding. Another $5 million for Free Guy. Cry Macho, which is the new Clint Eastwood Western, debuts in third place, which is the same place where Malignant debuted last weekend. It was another day-and-date streaming release for Warner Brothers, and it continues to show that they are struggling on these day-and-date releases to find a hybrid audience. Now, the Samba TV numbers came in, and again, if you're comparing it to the other measurements made by Samba TV, Cry Macho was not an especially popular watch for the devices that they were able to measure. It measured right up there around In the Heights, which was around half of what the Little Things pulled in early this year. So I don't think there was a lot of market interest in Cry Macho. But again, we're seeing the fact that these day-and-date summer releases, particularly for adult-skewing films from Warner Brothers, aren't really paying off at the box office. At number 4, Candyman 2021 in its fourth week, holding well for a horror film. We'll talk about its place in the summer box office picture in just a moment. And at number 5, James Wan's Malignant in its second week falls to number 5 with $2.7 million. I did finally see Malignant. I have a backlog of videos to do since I've been gone for 10 days. Malignant is one of them because that is, say what you will about the movie, and I will, one of the most unique films of 2021. I can't think of a movie. Well, maybe Annette, which is another movie I still need to talk about. Maybe we'll start a series of videos called the WTF Files about these 2021 movies. So unique, unlike anything else that you're going to see. Kind of to circle back around and wrap up with Shang-Chi and Black Widow and the whole day-and-date release thing. And again, Black Widow does have revenue that came in from the Disney Premier Plus or Disney Plus with Premier Access, whatever the hell it's called, that is off the books, at least box office-wise, that Shang-Chi does not have. But when you see just the difference in an MCU film, and there are other differences besides just the streaming thing, the fact that it is a little bit more of a critical hit, a little bit more of an audience hit, but you can see this separation when we look at the total domestic gross day to day. We're now 17 days into the release of both films, and you see that gap widening. Shang-Chi has now outgrossed Black Widow by about $22 million at the domestic box office, and I think that gap largely is some of that repeat business, probably even, that you did not get with the premiere access, along with people that did not go out to the theater to see Black Widow. And this is all about different revenue streams, etc. This is not a cut and dry thing. It's not like Black Widow had only a theatrical release, but again, it's something to look at. When you look at the different models, the different release strategies, etc., Shang-Chi really widening that gap, and we're going to see it now. Probably in the next week or so. I'd be shocked if it wasn't in the next week. It is going to surpass Black Widow. It's going to become the number 1 movie of the summer, and it's going to become the highest grossing movie at the domestic box office post-pandemic. So you're going to see those things in the box office record book, and plenty of discussion to be had about streaming, etc. But Shang-Chi is going to take that crown very soon. Let's look at the top movie per theater, and it was one of those weeks where the top per theater average belonged to a movie that was only playing in one theater. It averaged $7,162 in that one theater. The movie is called Wife of a Spy. That was at the IFC Theater in New York. This is a movie that played at the Venice Film Festival, not this year, 2021, but last year back in 2020. It won the Silver Lion, which is the Venice Film Festival's equivalent of the Best Director Award for Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who I had to look this up. No relation to Akira Kurosawa. I'm sure that's very different. It'd be like another American director having the last name Spielberg. That prize, by the way, the Silver Lion for Best Director, went to Jane Campion this year for the movie The Power of the Dog. Wife of a Spy rolls out to other theaters nationwide in the coming weeks, but at the one theater in New York at which it played this week, it is the number 1 movie per theater. Looking at limited release, movies that are released in 1,000 theaters or fewer, we have at number 1, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is a festival movie. Some have been throwing it into the awards season picture. It stars Jessica Chastain as Tammy Faye Baker, who was the wife of the infamous televangelist Jim Baker. This was kind of based off of a documentary of the same name that came out several years ago. It's number 1 in 450 theaters at $652,000, which sounds, not bad, but I think that they had hoped that the number might be a little higher for this film, especially given the buzz that it was getting. Paul Schrader's The Card Counter in its second week is at $418,000. In its second week, in a big expansion at 477 theaters, Blue Bayou, which is from writer, director, actor actor Justin Chan. He plays a Korean man in America facing possible deportation. This movie played at the Cannes Film Festival. It co-stars Alicia Vikander. Good enough for number 3. At number 4, a 4K IMAX re-release of the 1995 animated Ghost in the Shell, not the Scarlett Johansson film, in 124 theaters, makes $220,000 in its opening week. And then at number 5, the documentary The Alpinist, which we talked about last week, in 245 theaters, makes $138,000 as it stays in the top 5 for a second week. We looked at the box office internationally for this past weekend, where Dune was number 1. Now let's look at the worldwide market. So this is the international box office plus the domestic box office. And Shang-Chi is able to stay number 1 with $41.9 million with its domestic gross added in. Dune, though, is the number 2 highest grossing movie worldwide for this past weekend at $36.8 million. The Chinese film Cloudy Mountain is at number 3 with $18.6 million. Free Guy's at number 4 with $13.4 million. And Paw Patrol the movie made $7.3 million worldwide, good enough to stay in 5th place. Let's look at some of the 2021 yearly charts, and domestically, there was a little bit of motion. Shang-Chi moves up 2 slots. I mentioned that it is going to surpass Black Widow very soon to become the highest grossing domestic film post-pandemic. It is only about $7 million off of that mark, and it's not only going to be number 1 domestically for 2021, it's probably going to be the first film to pass $200 million post-pandemic, so another mark that's going to fall to Shang-Chi. Black Widow, though, for now, still at number 1. F9 and A Quiet Place Part 2 both drop down 1 spot to numbers 3 and 4. And then the rest of the top 10 stays the same. Jungle Cruise, Free Guy, Godzilla vs. Kong, Cruella, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, rounding out the 2021 domestic top 10. Looking at the worldwide top 10 for 2021, Shang-Chi also on the move there. It moves up to number 6 with $320 million. It's now only about $57 million behind Black Widow's global total, at least as far as box office goes. Again, this is not counting streaming revenue. Free Guy stays at number 7. A Quiet Place Part 2 moves down 1 spot to number 8. Cruella's at number 9. Chinese Doctors is at number 10 for now, but Jungle Cruise looks like it will imminently be taking that spot on the top 10. So this is likely Chinese Doctors last week at the 2021 worldwide box office. In the top 10, we're going to see Jungle Cruise taking that spot. And then we'll have 8 out of 10 of these movies, which has been a while since we've seen Hollywood films taking these many slots at the worldwide box office. But it looks like we will have that next week when Jungle Cruise takes that spot. The top 5 remain the same: Hi Mom, F9, Detective Chinatown 3, Godzilla vs. Kong, and Black Widow. As I mentioned, we are well into September at this point, but there is still motion going on at the summer box office. I saw a couple commenters last week saying, like, why are you talking about the summer? We're way past it. Well, yeah, we may be, but we still count that box office. We don't stop counting the money when the summer officially ends on Labor Day weekend. And Shang-Chi, it's pretty much the same as the domestic picture, is now number 2. It will be number 1. Shang-Chi is going to go down in the record books as the number 1 movie theatrically being the key word, for summer 2021. F9 and A Quiet Place Part 2 dropping down 1 spot. And that really only leaves one bit of unfinished business, which is, what is that number 10 spot going to be? Right now it is The Boss Baby, Family Business, but I'm going to go ahead. This is kind of like the decision desk on election night. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of calls here. Number 1, if we look at my top 10 summer box office predictions, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate the Suicide Squad. Even though it is still making more money than The Boss Baby, and it is somewhat close to its gross, I just don't see the Suicide Squad doing what needs to be done to be the number 10 movie. And that's because if you look at my prediction of what number 10 would be, I believe that Candyman 2021, I'm not yet calling it. I'm not going to put it in green because it hasn't yet happened, but I've seen enough to say I'm going to project that Candyman will be the 10th highest grossing film of summer 2021. Maybe I'll get this wrong and we'll have to go to a recount or whatnot, but I believe that Candyman is going to be the 10th highest ranking film of summer 2021, which means that I am eliminating Suicide Squad from contention. So it's kind of a good news, bad news for me. I will have correctly predicted 8 of the top 10, which isn't bad, but I will have missed 2 of the top 5, which is pretty miserable. So I will continue to update this. If Candyman makes it official, then we will wrap out summer 2021, because after Shang-Chi, Best Black Widow, and then we decide number 10, that's going to be it for summer 2021. Looking at the highest worldwide grossing films for the previous 365 days, again, Shang-Chi on the move. It's now number 8, just below Black Widow, and right above Free Guy. Quiet Place Part 2 drops down to number 9. My People, My Homeland is spending its last few days, really, 9 days away from cycling off of this chart there at number 6. Demon Slayer, the movie, also getting close to a year since that movie opened in Japan, so we'll be cycling that out, and we'll keep doing this as long as there are 2020 movies to put on this chart, and then we're going to have to cycle it out like we did with the domestic chart, but still some motion going on. Before we go to the streaming charts, I always like to do a little bit of a flashback to a previous year, and we are going to go back to September 22nd to the 24th, 1995, and this is really just because I like this combination of films. Seven opened, or Sevenin, as it's often billed, at number 1 with $13.9 million, and then Showgirls, I'd even forgotten this. Showgirls opened the same weekend as Seven on a wave of controversy. It was not played at many theaters. It was an NC-17 rated film. It made $8.1 million, even though it wasn't playing in many locations. In second place, one of the most unique films ever put out by a Hollywood studio, certainly one of the most unconventional in week 3. To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar came in at number 3 that week. Dangerous Minds in its 7th week was at number 4. And then in its second week, the film Clockers by Spike Lee. And this is what I thought was so interesting. You have this weekend in 1995. In the top 5, you have new films or newish films from Paul Verhoeven, David Fincher, Spike Lee. That's pretty cool for one weekend back in the 1990s. So let's turn now to what people are watching at home as we look at the streaming charts, and we will start with Amazon. Candyman 2021, even though it's still in the top 5 at the box office, also hit the premium video on demand market so people could rent it for a premium price at home. It is number 1 on Amazon, followed by Don't Breathe 2, also available PVOD. The Suicide Squad hits premium video on demand and purchase. They're split out on the Amazon charts, so it has rotated off of this HBO Max window of exclusivity and is now available to people in other places. It's at number 3. Stillwater and Jungle Cruise are at numbers 4 and 5. A Quiet Place Part 2 and Respect are at numbers 6 and 7. The purchase of Black Widow, which is now also on the market, is at number 8. The Suicide Squad purchase is at number 9. And The Green Knight, available PVOD, is on the chart again at number 10. As we look at what people are watching through the iTunes store, Candyman is number 1 there as well, premium video on demand. Black Widow hitting the purchase market is at number 2. F9 is at 3. The Suicide Squad hits number 4. The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard at number 5. At number 6 is the newest Nicolas Cage film. It's called Prisoners of the Ghostland, and I'm just going to try to briefly describe this to you. It co-stars Sofia Boutella. Nicolas Cage plays a character named Hero, who is seeking a kidnapped woman on behalf of the governor of Samurai Town in an irradiated Japanese wasteland. You know, say what you will about Nicolas Cage, he picks interesting projects, and there's another one there at number 6. At number 7, one of the 99-cent rentals this week, Lansky. We've seen it in the top 10 earlier this summer. At number 8, Venom. I guess people checking out those trailers. We're getting close to the release of the movie since it was moved up to early October. It is at number 8. Tombstone's at number 9. I don't know why, but I love Tombstone. I'm just going to say it's the All My Movies bump. Maybe a little bit of a delayed reaction from my episode on Tombstone. Probably a much different reason. I don't really care why it's in the top 10. I love Tombstone. And rounding out the top 10, people purchasing Jungle Cruise. And as we always do to finish out the show, let's see what people are watching on Netflix. And this is the overall Netflix chart. At number 1 is the 3rd season of the Netflix original series Sex Education. Squid Game is at number 2. This is a Korean import about adults who play deadly kids games. Sure, why not? It's the 2nd highest watched series on Netflix right now. The Denzel Washington film Safe House, along with Ryan Reynolds, is at number 3. The Netflix original series Clickbait and Lucifer, still in the top 5 after last week. The Netflix original movie Kate is at number 6. At number 7 is The Father Who Moves Mountains, which is a Romanian film that is distributed on Netflix. At number 8, the year's 2183. Artificial intelligence has taken over the world, subjugating humans and plunging the Earth into a nightmarish hellscape. But inside the AI, a rogue piece of code dares to defy its programming and worked to warn the humans of their plight. Its first attempt, the movie The Matrix, failed to rouse humanity from its slumber, instead being hailed as a groundbreaking piece of science fiction. So, as a measure of last resort, the Code injected a program into the humans' collective consciousness that was so shocking, its very presence could serve to spark a revolution. That program is CoComelon, now spending its 26th consecutive week on the Netflix chart. Wake up, sheeple. At number 9 is the Netflix original dating series, The Circle, and rounding out the Netflix top 10 is Night Books, which is a youth-skewing Sam Raimi-produced horror film that debuted on the service this past week. And finally, let's see what people are watching on the movie side of Netflix. Safe House Kate, The Father Who Moved Mountains, and Night Books are numbers 1 through 4. An Unfinished Life is at number 5. The Netflix original The Stronghold is at number 6. Vivo is at number 7. Birth of the Dragon, which is a fictionalized Bruce Lee biopic, is at number 8. That came out back in 2016. Fire Drake stays at number 9, and School of Rock remains on the chart at number 10. And that wraps it up for this episode of Charts with Dan. Coming up this weekend, the major release is the Universal adaptation of the musical Dear Evan Hansen, which has already screened at some festivals and got a lot of the internet and particularly social media buzzing. Critics have been very unkind to this movie. I have to be honest, I am anxious to see it. I know that this musical has a rabid fan following, so this should be an interesting weekend when we talk about the reaction to the movies. But that is this is kind of a little bit of a breath before we go into the teeth of October, where we have movies like The Many Saints of Newark and Venom and No Time to Die and The Last Duel, Halloween Kills, Dune. It's a big October for movies, and we are just getting ready to dive into it. So tune in next week. We'll be talking about Dear Evan Hansen. We'll be back on Monday, which is our regularly scheduled day. Thank you so much for watching the show. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And you can also join me here on the channel as I do reviews, box office, movie news. There's been a lot of questions about the live show that I had been doing earlier that is going to be coming back soon. All my movies, my podcast will also be coming back soon. I'm finalizing some details on that. I'm going to have some big announcements regarding all of that stuff coming up. This past weekend, this vacation was great. Some great friends and some great times and some time away. But now that I am back, we are really going to be diving into some new ventures and picking some things up and starting some new things here on the channel. And I'm excited to tell all of you about that very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and come back next week as we cover the weekend box office. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.